Just gonna clean up my desktop here. Hello? What do you mean the agent just went down? Data source not found? Oh no.
Hello, everyone. And today we are going to be talking about how to help your AI strategy, not just today, but for tomorrow, and how to make sure that your AI strategy doesn't fail because your data failed. And with me today is Tom Cooper. He's our product owner for our AI platform. Tom, how are you doing?
Good.
This is a really interesting topic because I think a lot of times when people start talking about AI, they get very excited about all the cool features and all the things that we're doing. But when we actually start getting down into the value at that data level, we start to see people's eyes get real small. They're like, what do you mean data? Yeah. Where does that live? And so when we're talking to clients, how often are we seeing clients not entirely understand what to do about their data? Like how to handle that?
Yeah, I don't want to say 100%, but it's 100%.
Okay.
I think traditionally we come, when you're working in the data center space, you have an understanding of the structure of your data in local ADs, on local servers. You can understand hard drive space, but the kind of breadth and scope of today's data expands to tons of SaaS services all over the place. So, if you're talking about SharePoint, you could be talking about Teams, OneDrive. Even though all three of those come from the same core place, it's still a completely different set of data and has a completely different set of restrictions and requirements for pulling that data, making sure it's available. And that's the tip of the iceberg. I mean, we're talking about Zoom, Slack, Salesforce. Data is just everywhere now. It's very unlikely that I run into a client whose data is just kind of locally stored.
Yeah, I do a little survey whenever I talk about AI things, and I ask how many people still store all your stuff on one server. I've had one hand ever go up on that. In fact, I was stunned when it went up to the point where I said, I need to hold everything. What are you doing? And they said, well, we're still a really small company, so we actually do have a file server, and it's all just in that one place. But it was very interesting because you're right. We've seen this proliferation. And one of the things that we have seen as Expedient is DR plans and backup plans don't always include those things. I think there's a base level of belief that, oh, well, it's in Office 365. Microsoft is backing that up. Or it's in Confluence, and Confluence is backing that up. And while that is true to a very, very small extent, what it means is that you're basically reliant on, it's like saying your backup is the recycle bin. Like if I hit delete on my machine and a file goes into the recycle bin, it's not that it's backed up, it just hasn't been deleted yet.
Right.
And that's what we see a lot of people reliant upon in terms of backups, because they're not going to worry about the actual infrastructure. They're worried about individual messages or individual mailboxes. So the thing that we see in terms of AI is that it doesn't really matter if we can't keep that value of that data online. Not just the data itself, but the value that it's driving. So where do you see a lot of organizations kind of getting caught off guard?
Well, first, the word disaster recovery is not, oops, there was a little problem recovery. Right? It's disaster recovery. It is when I lose a large set of data, when we have somebody delete a site, when we have an accidental problem where years worth of data gets deleted. Well, if I've built AI solutions that rely on that data, that's taking historical data that's no longer being updated, it's there historically to make decisions, whether they're autonomous or not, losing that data is catastrophic not only to the organization, but it's catastrophic to every service that they've built within AI, whether they're workflows or true agents that's relying on that data. And the market today looks at AI, I guess I would say it started looking at AI as Gen AI, but now every use of AI in a business is how does AI interact with your current data and how does it make use of your historical data to make accurate decisions. If that data is not protected, well, the entire workflow that you've built or the entire agent can be subject to failure.
And that kind of underscores, it's very similar to, if you think about it in terms of an agent and you think about that autonomy, think about it as like another user. if I have another user who is like, if my user base can't get access to that historical data to make decisions, they're dead in the water too. So it's not just the AI pieces of that story. I think there's also the people element there too. So how are you protecting that? And I think that work that we can put in around disaster recovery and data recovery is really, really critical. And I think this is where we see a real difference between something like backup and resilience. Because backups are one thing. That is another copy of that data. It exists somewhere else. And if something bad were to happen, we can just pull back from that copy. No big deal. And that's part of resilience, but it's not having the location to restore to. It's not having the ability to do that restoration. It's not testing that restoration. It's just you have the other copy somewhere else. So when we start talking about resilient AI, which I think is where we see a huge opportunity for organizations to not just look at AI as this future state, but also enable growth and improvements into existing processes that they have today with DR and their backup platforms. What do we see from a resilient AI? Like, how do we see resilient AI impacting an organization that way?
I mean, if we were to take a simple example, so let's say our sales team relying on immediately responding to RFPs, right? Mm-hmm. So it becomes a part of their everyday process. An RFP comes in. Traditionally, those took months to answer, maybe weeks. Months might be an exaggeration. Some of them are weeks, but you can't talk to any technology pro. Everybody makes the face that you just made about RFPs because it's people like you and I who would get pulled into answering the 70 to 100 hardest questions. So if I've built an ecosystem where now you and I are no longer plugged in because we've taken all that historical data, I've brought it all into an AI agent. I have a true autonomous agent where my salespeople, so the salespeople through this whole organization, go in and count on that in order to answer RFPs. If suddenly I've lost that data and I don't have the ability to bring that data into not just the autonomous agent that needs it to answer the RFPs, but now I'm in a situation where my salespeople don't have the direct connections to people like you and I, and now the entire process of answering incoming sales based on RFPs grinds to a halt. So it's incredibly important to make sure that not only are we pushing forward the AI and agentic solutions, right? Which is, that's part of where I sit in the organization. Let's make sure everybody buys it, but let's make sure the data that we're building these solutions for continues to be available no matter what, because without it, a specific agent like the RFP agent becomes useless and you break down the sales process in the organization.
And I think that's really where understanding your data sources comes into play. Where is your critical data and how are you protecting that? And how would you put it back into place if it gets deleted? And by the way, it's not, hey, SharePoint's going to disappear one day. I mean, AWS can have a very large outage from time to time, so can Azure, so can any other SaaS service. I'm not talking about that type of outage. I'm talking about somebody accidentally deletes a file. We have all been there where some very critical file gets accidentally deleted, or even it's in a sillier move, just literally moved to another folder. No one knows where it got moved to because somebody accidentally dragged it somewhere else. That critical piece of data is being pointed to by an agent, by a workflow, or by a person to actually drive the business. So being able to have that, I think about, like, for us, we have a very large database of information on our data centers. We get asked a lot in the RFP process, hey, what carriers come into this data center? How many square feet is this data center? It's the same answer every time, right? It's not hard. It's a set of data. Making sure that that data is always available for that RFP agent to work is crucial. And not thinking about that in terms of how would I recover in the event of SharePoint is offline for a long time, or that site somehow got deleted. How would I restore that site? How would I put that back into service? That plays into an overall strategy. And I think if you're a CIO, if you're a director of IT, this is an opportunity to leverage all the hype and excitement around AI that everybody wants to go do and say, this is a critical piece of it, and get the investment to make those improvements if that's something you've been trying to get for years. Yep. And I think when we start talking about, you've been mentioning workflows and agents. Tell me a little bit more about that, because when we've generally talked about AI, we've been talking about generative AI. When you go into ChatGPT, ask it a prompt, it gives you back a big response, and then you as a human can use that somewhere. So when we start talking about workflows and agents, where do you see that? And also kind of what's that difference between the two?
So generative AI is the most recent breakthrough in AI. And AI has been, deep research, machine learning. These have all been around for 60 years. So generative AI was the initial release of LLM models that can really generate human-sounding responses that are informed because they've been trained on the internet. This was a revolution for enterprise a couple of years ago. This is the fastest any enterprise technology has moved through the enterprise space. There's a lot of checks and balances that are missing. A lot of the DR stuff we're talking about right now are some of those things that are missing. But agents and workflows were the first kind of modification or the first products to say, how can I leverage AI in a way where I can either have a process that I have executed multiple times locally, and now I want to turn that into an automated process. It doesn't have to be autonomous, right? When I want to generate my sales numbers, I no longer have to go through Salesforce and comb through Salesforce. I instead have a workflow that knows where all of that data lives, brings out that data, connects that data to my spreadsheets, and then connects that data to my dashboards, and then creates all of the emails I need to create. What was 5 hours of work at the end of the month and maybe an hour of work a day becomes a 6-second button push. That's the huge win of workflows. And there's tons of ways to look at workflows. It is, I want to connect to disparate systems and I want to use AI as a piece in my workflow. I want it to analyze data, connect data. Agents are, if you were to think of a workflow as an individual action or a tool, an agent is an autonomous piece of code that can take in a request and look at all of the tools or all of the workflows you've built and make a decision on what to do. So when we're talking about this in the sales process, we're talking about you have low blast radius workflows, which would be, hey, I want to route a ticket to the right queue. Very low impact if I mess up. If the agent's wrong, puts it in an unassigned queue, it just means a human picks it up or somebody has to unassign it.
Right. It goes, oh, this went into the network queue. It's actually a backup ticket. Yep. Somebody in the network queue goes, it's a backup ticket.
Very low blast radius. Those are workflows. Where automation comes into place with agents is, what if I want a ticket solver? What if I want a ticket that comes in and a agent analyzes that ticket to see if that ticket is in the top 10% of easy to answer tickets, then goes in and uses a tool or a workflow to pull out previous cases that we've solved and attempts to solve that before it ever makes it to a human. Now, this is a big blast radius. No human wants to say, hey, I'm having a BGP problem, and then get a ticket back that says, here's how you reset your switch password, right? That would be
bad time.
Frustrating, bad NPS scores. So agents now are that culmination of, I have done the workflow enough that I've gained enough confidence that I can have an autonomous agent with a handful of tools. It's where we've gotten as an organization now, where we're confident that a large portion of the entry tickets that come in can be solved automated. But if I've done that, if I've put that in place, well, what is involved in that agent solving the problem? My ticket information, my queues, my previous responses. If I lose any of those, even if it's intermittent, just like the world lost AWS recently, right? Cause an actual economic blip because AWS went down. If that's happening and I rely on that like we do for our 12,500 tickets a month, I can't not have that data be resilient. It's gotta be resilient. It's gotta be there. If SharePoint goes down, I gotta have a place for it to route somewhere else to pull that data that is momentarily brought back up. And that's the holistic solution of AI, from generative AI to workflows to agents.
And I think that's the big thing that a lot of people see when they start talking about agents is, okay, now I have to integrate my processes. And one of the things that I see as a huge a huge way to help organizations feel more confident in using them is man-in-the-middle actions. So I have a process where this agent, so like that BGP problem, that comes in. I don't want an agent going out and making BGP changes or sending back the wrong documentation. That agent could come back and say, hey, sending that ticket to the networking team and saying, hey, this person says they're having an issue connecting to these things based on previous ticket data. I think it's one of these problems. I've tested to see that any of these problems could be fixed by this. Here's what I think the recommended action is. Do you want me to go execute that and have an approve button?
Yep.
And so you now have the ability to say a human saw this prior to it going out and executing something. That I think is where I think a lot of people don't realize that's a possibility. They think, oh, if I roll out this agent, it's just instantly going to start going out and doing things. It's having that confidence there, and also can say, hey, I don't have any ticket data to go off of, so I'm going to attempt something I might like. That's where a hallucination potentially comes in.
Yep.
Or write in your prompt to say, if you can't find any data, fail and just put the ticket in the queue. Those are the sorts of things to think about. And that's far beyond just the base technology of I have an agent that can do things.
Yep.
It's how do I actually put that all into practice?
We call that human in the loop in the actual tool. And it is essential to understand that implementing human in the loop doesn't go away once you've gone to full autonomous. What it becomes is the mechanism that an autonomous agent will use when it doesn't know what decision to make. And the moment you start giving agent options to do to take a action when it doesn't know what to do, you remove the possibility of hallucinations, right? If I've given you a data set that is your world, you have to answer from this data set. If you don't have an answer, you're not allowed to hallucinate. And if you're not allowed to hallucinate, then what's your action? Your action is to invoke our human in the loop mechanism. And so that's the benefit of human in the loop, right? So it is the ability to get to what is a full autonomous solution, but because it's when you give it a data set, you're removing its capability to hallucinate, right? You're saying you have to answer from this set of tickets. You can't make up this answer. You can't assume an answer. Well, the ability to have human in the loop give an autonomous agent the ability to invoke where we bring the most expertise for those hard to solve problems that aren't one-step problems. And you can see the benefit is, how do I get this agent to be more and more successful at answering tickets? But never do I see a place where you take out the human in the loop. It's why you'll never have a set of tickets or instructions that answer every problem. So as long as you have an answer for that in the solution, which in our case, human in the loop is probably the number one feature that we have to help companies enable autonomous agents, you get to actually tackle some of these bigger blast radius issues.
Yeah, and I think that allows us to not just maintain that accuracy, but also maintain that level of control. I look at it in terms of like, I'm not necessarily super confident. I want everything to go to human in the loop until I'm ready to say, okay, I'm going to turn the human in the loop down. I'm going to say these tickets can go off. It's hit these every single time. That's fine. Here's where the human in the loop comes in. I think that's the bigger piece, and enabling that and ensuring that that data set that it's working off of is available all the time is where the resilient AI and the agentic AI really comes together. So what do we think business leaders can do right now? Because I think there's a lot of opportunity now, and we're not fully in flight yet. Everybody wants to roll out agents, everybody wants to roll out workflows, but I think there's some steps that need to be taken before that. So where do you see being the first step or the first few steps in terms of looking at workflows and agents and how that plays into that data story?
I think first it is modeling what you're going to do with AI and have a human do this. This should be step one. Can I validate that an AI assist here can help solve a problem for me? And in most cases, that answer is yes. So once you've modeled that out, you have a human testing it, then understanding the data that's being given to that use case. can we make sure that that data comes from a reliable place? Right. That, and I understand, SharePoint is reliable. I understand that, maybe getting something out of Box is reliable. But at the end of the day, if somebody deletes that data, like you said earlier, if that data, it's very easy to see how, if you've moved everything to SharePoint, your Box or your Dropbox instances go away, and maybe there are workflows built on those that you don't know. So step 2 is making sure the data that I'm using in this manual step is, for lack of a better term, resilient, right? We have it protected. We know we can count on it. Then step 3 is, let me take this thing that I'm doing now with this data that I know I can count on, and let me create a workflow. Now, this workflow can either be push button, or this workflow can be, hey, if I'm gathering data, if I'm summarizing data, if I'm transforming data, maybe it runs nightly or hourly. Right. Set these up. So now that I have these and I'm monitoring them, and at the end of the day, I should have get to a place where I have lots of these workflows running, basically making more efficient my humans that are taking actions, my employees that are taking actions in specific areas. And then once I have a set of workflows that I know make sense, I know the data is protected, then I can take into account, how can I have an agent where I'm going to be hands off for anything that's not human in the loop, and have it start executing these workflows when it needs it. And it's really at this point that is the center point of the crux of why the resiliency promo is so important. AI resiliency, when you're clicking a button, you can understand, I can click it in a little bit. Maybe SharePoint's down right now. Maybe Box is down.
I'll wait 10 minutes and then I can click the button.
But the moment I want to go to autonomous agents, which is where you're going to find the most value out of AI, out of workflows, out of generative AI, and out of enterprise data being connected to AI, is at the place where you have to be most confident that the data is always going to be available. And that's my 4th step. It is, let's get some things autonomously running. I think, and I don't want to harp over it. I think that the outside view is AI is replacing people. AI is not replacing people. AI is making people's jobs more efficient and letting them focus, hopefully, on things they're better at, which are things that they're happier doing. Nobody wants to go through and pull through Salesforce to find all of the numbers and the right filters. Nobody wants to go through remedial tickets and look for what the answers are for 50. The goal is to make people more efficient so that they can be more effective for your customers or for your line of work.
And I think that's really where that resiliency comes into play. And one of the things I would almost add, like step 1B, is how resilient is my data? If my source is SharePoint, what would I do? And assessing that strategy and procedure of, do I have this backed up? What happens if somebody deletes a file? Do I know that I can get that data back? How often do I test those backups? Yeah. How often, if I'm now talking to my internal applications, if I'm writing APIs or starting to get into things like Model Context Protocol, MCP, and I'm starting to put that in front of my applications, how do I ensure those applications are available? Because those are the bigger sort of rocks that you're going to have to deal with as a base foundation. Because if you don't have the resiliency story in place, getting to that workflow, getting that autonomy is just not going to be successful long term. It'll be successful for a while until there's a problem, until a file's deleted, until there's an outage. And I think where we come in is this, as you mentioned, that Resilient AI promo, where we're bundling AI, DR, and backup things together, and we could add some savings to it to really show some true value to an organization. And we've had a number of organizations that come to us starting with DR, because we're a DR as a service provider, and a lot of that turns into, hey, how are you actually handling AI for the future too? And when we start having that conversation, we see organizations say, okay, we're fixing the problem of today, which is I need to improve my disaster recovery. I need to improve my data protection story. But you can also help me with tomorrow too. And when we think about it, we want to put it together in a holistic manner that makes the most sense. So I think what we're seeing is that AI success isn't about how fast you can move.
No.
A lot of organizations think, well, I got to go first. Well, if you go first, hey, listen, the first one in the pool finds out how cold it is. So it's about how confidently you can recover, how confidently you can move forward with that AI use case, with these tools, the workflows, the agents. So how do we see this really enabling, the next few years for an organization today?
I think there are a couple of principles coming from the software development side of the world that have been applied that we understand from deploying AI that maybe somebody who hasn't built software doesn't understand. So when we build software, there's a direction you have to look at it from. I have to have databases. Those databases have to be highly available. I have to already think about the resilience of the application because I can't have you, let's say we had built a CRM, I can't have you in the middle of updating a record and then have the database connection go down and nobody will use your, that happens to a single salesperson and the whole CRM can get thrown out of an organization, right? So we already approach it from a software perspective, understanding that what we're trying to do now is migrate that to understanding really building these workflows and making successful agents follow the same paradigms that building successful software does. You have to know the places you get your data from are always going to be there. You have to know the places where you put your AI is always going to be available. And you have to know that the combination of two, when they're executed, always is going to have a expected result. So in my area, I see AI outpacing as kind of the new technology. Everybody's excited about it. So we're now getting a ton of new logos into us as Expedient that aren't coming in through the traditional data center routes. They're not coming in because they did DR with us. And it really gives us the opportunity to say, here's what our AI solution can do, but here's how you can implement this AI solution in a way where your board, your CTO, your CIO can be happy with the path that you've taken because you can put some confidence. So we can start bringing them into the DR discussion. And, there's no company that unless they have a complete pre-built DR and backup system right now that's 100% happy with all of their DR and backup. So if we get to open that app,
we have a few of those, by the way. We have a few of those customers
for ours, but not the ones that are coming in new. I would say that if you pulled every net new logo that came in just by AI from us, my guess would be 99% of them coming from the outside don't have a holistic backup solution or DR solution. Us being able to provide that to them and along with the efficiency gains that they're going to get from AI is going to allow them to stop worrying about and spending time on whether their systems are going to go down, whether they're healthy, whether they're backed up, and whether or not these workflows are working. You end up in a net positive across the board.
And with that, we're going to turn it over to live Q&A. We hope you join us there. There's going to be a QR code on the screen that you'll be able to click or to be able to scan to be able to ask a question, and we will see you there. Tom's on, I'm on, and we are back for live Q&A. Tom, an amazing conversation, and I think a lot of that conversation was helpful for a lot of folks to understand where we're going in this space, not just with our AI tools, but also with DR and backup. But we did receive a few questions, and as always, I want to thank everybody who submitted questions during the registration process. I think we can start with the first question here. By the way, if you have any questions, right above here is a QR code, and you can scan that, and you can ask questions live, as we have now. But we're going to go through some of the pre-registration questions, and we'll take the first one now. There we go. Best practices for information on protecting sensitive data and working models and having resilience, backup, and failover. This is definitely somebody, the person who asked this also had an additional piece about being a smaller shop, not having, teams of people to do this. It's really, the one or two people that they have to work on this. So as they're becoming more reliant on this, kind of what do you see as those best practices, specifically around things like models, but also around their data sources as well?
Yeah, I think the approach that we took, in talking about how to approach backing up and providing resilience to your data is important, but we didn't talk a lot about how to protect sensitive data, and that really comes down to: are you using AI that's provided in a way where DPAs for not training are attested to? Are you storing data in a local network, or are you pulling that data and vectorizing data and passing those vectors out to a public network? So the first thing you want to do, especially as a small one-person shop, and this is obviously self-serving to us, but find a company like us who takes all the security concerns out of it. We provide you with a top to bottom internal environment where your data is protected. You have the standard kind of SOC 2 protections, ISO 27001 protections, NIST protections that we have as a data center. But then you get the ability to plug LLMs on top of that and have us or whatever company you're talking to monitoring the security status and the training status of your data, making sure that when you're using data with AI, that you're protected.
Yeah, I think the other piece there is to just as a best practice is start with what are the most important sources of data. So if it's going to be SharePoint, do you have that backed up? When was the last time you tested that backup? If it hasn't been in the last 6 months, you should test that. Don't delete your important data and then try to recover it, because if you fail, it's a bad time. But understand, do you have proper backups around those? Also look at your DR plans. When was the last time you tested your DR plan? What was the outcome of that? Was it good? If it was good, great. What have you added since then? Understanding all of those things that need to be done day in and day out, but they still apply. And I also look at this as kind of the hammer that a lot of people have needed to get things through. Maybe DR or backup of those data sources wasn't necessarily a high priority, say, in the budgeting process. But if you're going to rely on it with AI, this is a way to get dollars associated with those projects. I look at this the same way with data cleanup as well, or data governance, where you've wanted to organize data, you've wanted to put more governance around your data, but you never really had the business requirement. You've never really had the business behind doing something like that. And now you can. And so it's also a way for you to put a little bit of a strong lever behind a project that you've wanted to get off the ground. Let's take the next question here. Understanding access privileges for NHIs. Tom, what's an NHI?
Well, a non-human entity, a non-human, I actually don't know what the I is.
Identity, maybe?
Identity? But in general, we are opening a world where we're bringing agents in to do jobs that humans did, right? So if you're handling ticket support, like I talked about us doing, you want to take that first level triage and move that into an agent that can do the job incredibly effectively, incredibly accurately, incredibly quickly, and then take your level 1 reps and let them become level 2 reps, right? Let them increase your NPS scores by handling the bigger problems. So as we start addressing in multiple divisions, adding agents, right? These are this is the crux of the question. How do you put the right guardrails around privileges for agents? And there's a two factor answer to this. The first factor is pretty simple. It is when I'm giving an agent access to data, I'm already bringing that data through a process where I've put governance and RBAC around that data. So I've had to specifically open that data to the agent, right? So I'm already handling permissions inherently in the process of building it. As that expands out, every agent that's going to be operating is going to start from a permissionless standpoint, and you should naturally evolve the permissions as you expose more data. If the expectation was, I have Salesforce, I have SharePoint, I have Zoom, I have Slack, and I'm going to throw an agent and give them 100% access to all of those and let it start answering questions and doing tasks, that'd be the wrong approach, right? The approach would be, let's find out the data pockets that are needed, make sure there's a pipeline to pull that data in. In some cases, that's through vectorization, because you need the data to be in a format that AI can access very well. And in some cases, it's not vectorized, right? If I'm pulling data out of Salesforce, I'm not vectorizing that data in the pipeline. So you would handle the permissions the same way you would handle a human. You build an agent, and then you would only give it access to the data it needs, regardless of how wonderful it may seem to just say, give all of the data, my whole SharePoint, and let it do the right thing, that would probably be the wrong approach.
I look at it the same way that we've looked at permissions for the last, I don't know, ever. Think of it like a user. What permissions would you give a user who is going to do that job? What permission structure would you give them in order to ensure that they are going to be successful, but also not putting organizational data at risk? These are effectively service accounts, and you can choose to give them as much or as little permissions as possible. One thing to do to start with is to give them read access. As Tom mentioned, triage. Let them read the data and say, hey, based on my knowledge set of the tickets that we've answered, here's what I think the answer is. Because that's a nice way to step into agents answering questions and then maybe giving them smaller, more granular capabilities. So think about a ticket router. One of the things we have is an email address, and that email address receives tickets from our users where they put in, hey, my backups are not are slow today, or I was trying to do a restore and I need some assistance. Things like that, where they're not going through our regular ticketing process. They just send an email because it's easier, right? But it reads it and says, hey, I think this ticket should go into this queue. It's not going in and fixing the backups. It's not going in and assisting with a restore. It's just moving the ticket into the right queue. So also think about a way for you to be granular about the permission sets that you're handing out, and also make sure that you're not having one agent account that has access to everything. Treat them like roles. This is my support analyst role. That has access to the ticketing system and to this particular email queue, but it doesn't have access to Salesforce because it doesn't need those things, right? So think about it again in very human terms. I know it seems it's a non-human entity, but think about it as if it were a human entity. We can go to the next question. What is the difference that AI brings into the traditional backup and recovery concerns? And Tom, I think I'll let you take some of this and I'll take some of the backup and DR things, but I think this really comes into sort of the new world.
I think this really borders on a lot of what we discussed in the webinar. And maybe there was a little bit of lacking of clarity, of clear definition or clear statement. If I'm relying on tickets coming in and a human to answer those tickets, there's a known understanding that ticket might take some time to answer. And we are kind of built around that today. So you may not need 100% uptime to get into your incident management system, because if the incident management system was down, you would wait to reply a little bit. But in a world where we're starting to build autonomous agents to do these things for us, their expectations are that they're available 24/7. And if we're going to build an agent that's available 24/7, there's a different scope that's required for backup, for recovery, for resilience in general, for the reliance of the data that's underlying. Again, a human could not answer a ticket. But what you wouldn't want an autonomous agent doing is attempting to answer a ticket where potentially half of the database is down and it only has access to half of the information. So it's making its best attempt at answering a question without the full data there. So by no means do I want to put guardrails around not exploring autonomy and getting agents and having them bring the value that they do. I would just preach at the same time, make sure you put for the data sets that are highly relevant to these agents, to make sure that those data sets have a solid backup plan, a solid recovery plan, so that, like everything else, the downtime that you would experience in the case of an emergency or a worst case situation or a failure is as limited as possible or as low as possible.
Yeah, I think what this is adding is almost a very specific application layer on top. Things that the business is now expecting above and beyond what was previously expected. As Tom mentioned, humans can work around certain things, right? Maybe they wouldn't respond as quickly if the ticketing system were down, or we might send out an automated email saying, hey, we're working on responses, but we're also in the middle of trying to get our ticketing data back online so that we can properly respond to you. Something along those lines. That's a human way of handling an outage of that nature. But if an autonomous agent is expecting things to be there and it's not going to work. So the consideration needs to be that your AI story needs to include resiliency. It needs to include all of the pieces that would go into making sure that this business critical application is going to remain online as much as possible, because if it's not going to work, and you're going to have potential failures or completely new failures where it won't just not work, it'll attempt to work in a bad way. So I think this is where it's adding in some of the additional importance, and adding in some of the additional pieces that you may need to have improved. You may need to put in more effort on your backups, where it's not just a checkbox to say, yeah, I got a copy somewhere. It's, I know that it's backed up. I know that it's restorable. I know that I can get that data back. And if something were to happen, that it would be able to be resolved, versus, I mean, man, I got it over there somewhere. We'll get it if we need it, right? It's less an insurance policy and more having higher resiliency in place. I think we can go to another question. I see a few people who are scanning to ask questions, and so hopefully they fill out their questions and send them in. What are strategies to have for AI and data security controls and best practices, and how to put those into place? The big one for me is, how do I enable my business to be able to use AI without putting my data at risk? Because a lot of times your end users do not know at all how data is used, how data is collected, how that data is used for training purposes for those particular public models. They see ChatGPT, I don't pay any money for it, I get things out of it, right? And so this is the classic, if you're not paying for the product, you're the product, and that data becomes a big problem. I actually just saw a study the other day that data loss prevention is becoming one of the biggest jumps in purchases around AI usage. 70% of users are copying and pasting data just into ChatGPT. It's not that they're not taking the Excel file and attaching it. They're just copying and pasting this data directly into the prompt. And so that becomes something where, like, okay, now I have to put more potential security controls around that. We've been asked, how do I protect my applications for users who are not on the VPN? As in, how do I protect my users from using their phones to use my company data somewhere else? And it's like, you don't. Unless you're going to put your corporate controls around personal data and personal phones, it's not going to go well. So this is where we're seeing a lot of, I look at this like as a parent, right? If I tell my kids they can't do something, the one thing they want to do is that, more than anything, right? But if I can offer my kids a way to do something very similar to that, to get the outcome that they want, and also potentially give them access to more things, that's the way that I want to go about that. But it's under my control. It's under my purview. And that's really where I see a lot of organizations right now struggling with AI, because they just, like, I bought Copilot, here's AI, here's Copilot. And people are like, Copilot stinks. I don't want to use this tool. I've yet to hear anybody go, man, Copilot, how great is that? It's not. And this is where we see a opportunity for people to get access to all these models. And that's what our tools in place. And Tom, I know you have a whole feeling about this one around AI and data and user security, and I'll let you go off here.
Yeah, well, for the sake of time, I'll give you my straightforward, most minimal answer. It is having a gateway where you can funnel all of your AI traffic through, so you can apply the policies and procedures that you need to all of the traffic that AI generates. So today's world is the wild, wild west. If you're paying for people to have Claude, you're paying for them to have OpenAI licenses, you're paying for them to have Gemini licenses, and they're using them through their phone because they don't have any other option. You have no control or visibility into that. So bringing the security controls into a single auditing platform, a single observability platform, a single place where you can apply rules and policies for usage is by far the best step. And there's no way to say you can't. If I didn't provide you your phone, I can't tell you not to use ChatGPT for free. But much like AJ was saying, if we've given them an option that is if you as a company has given your employees an option of not just the OpenAI client, but now you have a client that's mobile friendly, that's secure, that gives them all the functionality, if not more, and gives them access to all of the models. We don't find a reason why people would use the public free models and have that exposing. So kind of hidden in that, probably want to use network and content policies to shut down on at least company networks. ChatGPT, any of the LLM direct models, force everybody into the pipeline that you have control and observability. And not only do you get an answer to this question and you get good security measures, you also then have observability to understand how people are using it, what they're using it for. You get governance concerns taken care of and regulatory audits if you need them. You have all of the artifacts you need to provide them. So it's a win-win, but you have to start with bringing the AI into a funnel that you have control of. And if you can't do that, then at all points it stays the Wild Wild West.
And with that, we're going to wrap up here today. I want to thank Tom for all of his insight that he provided today. And if you want to see how you can save up to 20% on Expedient's DR and cloud data protection along with our AI platform, there's going to be a QR code right about here. And you'll be able to scan that. It will have a link that goes out to our Resilient AI page where you can learn more about our Resilient AI promo that we're running right now, along with best practices and other really great insights on how to not just provide AI to your organization, but ensure that it stays up and remains resilient going forward into the future. And with that, we're going to wrap up for today. Join us next month. We have a really great conversation coming with a customer next month. You're not going to want to miss that one. And I hope all of you have a wonderful and happy Thanksgiving if you're in the US. If you're in Canada, I hope you had a wonderful one last month. But we will see you next month. Thanks, everybody.